This is Interpreting Wine host and founder Lawrence Francis, welcoming you to this, my Willamette Valley Winemaker Special. Across these 20 episodes recorded in quickfire fashion in January 2020, I got to meet a broad selection of people making wine in the region, both a variety of winemaking scale from the micro to the macro, and also different focuses that include different aging vessels, different grape varieties, sparkling wines, and of course different interpretations of Pinot. Episodes are going to be released in the order that they were recorded, so you'll get to be a virtual guest on the tour. 2 things you can do to help spread this series even further. One is to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, either where you're listening or on your favorite podcast platform. And the second, the one that's really going to help push this out there, is to head to interpretingwine.com/iTunes and leave a review letting me know what you think. A genuine, huge thank you in advance. Today's episode of the Willamette Valley Winemaker Special features Joe Swick of Swick Wines. Making wine between Oregon and Washington states, and with extensive experience in both hemispheres, Joe weaves together his in-depth origin story and talks us through each vintage in detail since his inaugural vintage in 2013. We hear Joe's thoughts on the current state of the natural wine scene, and he relates this back to his winemaking style. And we taste 4 of his wines: the 2019 City Pop, the 2017 Chenin, the 2018 Bring It, and of course, the 2015 Oregon Pinot Noir. Enjoy.
So I'm Joe Swick. I've been making wine for almost half of my life. I'm 40 years old. I started when I was 21. Born and raised in Portland, Oregon. Wine was never a part of my life growing up. My parents never drank wine. Alcohol either really wasn't in my life until I was 21 and I could legally try and drink alcohol. And actually, that's when I first started. Yeah. So got into wine working for Whole Foods Market back before Whole Foods became the what they are now. Yeah. So back in those days, wine buyers had complete control over what they could bring into their set, according to the customers in their area, and so I got to taste a lot of great wines at a young age, back when first growth Bordeaux's and Premier Cru Burgundies were still affordable back in the late 90s, 2000s. So got into wine through wine retail, and then also I helped out in the back of the store a little bit with shipping and receiving, and that gave me the skill of driving a forklift, which is probably the most important thing, but the most important skill you need to have in the winery. If you want to be a winemaker, you have to drive a forklift. Yeah. So a winemaker that I loved, I still enjoy very much, Owen Rowe Winery in Washington. David O'Reilly from Owen Rowe offered me an internship to come out and work harvest and use my forklifting skills. And I kind of never looked back since then. I decided that I wanted to go to the School of Hard Knocks and not really take the academic route, though I did go to school for winemaking. My goal was to work for as many producers that I respected and wanted to learn from as possible around the world, and do that until enough was enough, and maybe start my own thing or work for someone else. And so I did that. I worked 15 harvests in 10 years, 2003 to 2012. Started out in Oregon. Here in Oregon, I worked for Owen Rowe, Chenin, where I made the wines right here in Medici, Penarash, Domaine Serene. And then down in the Russian River, I worked for Siduri and Costa Brown. And this is all Pinot Noir production. Then on the off season, I went over and worked in Tasmania. I was making bubbles in Tasmania and in the Yarra. So my focus was kind of sparkling wines. And then I wanted to learn more about biodynamic viticulture, and I went over to New Zealand for 2 years and worked in Central Otago. So I was working for Felton Road, Central Otago. Let's see. Then I wanted to go over to Europe, so I spent 2 harvests in the Douro. I worked for Newport, and I worked for Luis Seabra later on. But at the time, Luis was working as Dirk's enologist at that time, so that's how I got to know Luis Seabra. And then my last stint was working in Barolo. I worked for Ceretto in Barolo Barbaresco, Alba. So I draw from a lot of different sounds and colors and a lot of different cultures, and a lot of this has affected the way that I make wines now back in Oregon. And I think I kind of might have a little bit of a different outlook on winemaking or the wine culture in general in here in Oregon than maybe some other winemakers here because of that. I'm not sure. 2013 was my first year. That was probably the most difficult year that we've had, the last difficult year that we've had up till now. 14 through 19, 19 was a little bit problematic, but they've been pretty easy years, I think, compared to 2013. We had a vintage where everything was just spot on right up until about a week before harvest, and then it just dumped rain and changed the whole vintage. But we made some really, really nice, elegant Pinot Noirs that year, and some of my favorite wines. Anyway, 2013, I started with 2 wines. I made a Columbia Gorge Pinot Noir and a Yamhill Carlton Pinot Noir. Actually, I should talk about kind of before I get into this. So my wines are kind of considered natural wines. I'm not a big fan of using that word to label these wines because it's just not very specific about. That's just a broad term. I like to say low intervention or minimalist. I kind of have a minimalist approach to making wine. I like not to screw with it. I'd like it to be just grapes, ideally, if I could. But a lot of times when I do that, and I have done nothing added, zero sulfur wines. My 2015 vintage, I made every wine with zero sulfur, and we'll taste one of those wines right there. But there's too much of a risk involved, and sometimes I'm not very happy with the wines I make when I do zero sulfur added. And sometimes all it takes is literally just a little sprinkle to prevent some of those nasties that happen in bottle, and to have it taste like more wine. And so I'm willing, even if it's just 5 parts per million or 10 parts per million, that's not enough to change the wine for me. So I kind of went off topic there, so I'm going to go back to how I started. So 2013, I just started with 2 Pinot Noirs, a Yamhill Carlton Pinot Noir and a Columbia Gorge Pinot Noir. And I liked working with both these terroirs because they were both different. One is volcanic soil, the other is sedimentary soils. Different flavor profiles, both cold regions. A lot of acid and a lot of elegance from both of these terroirs. And that was what I wanted to do. That was where I was focusing, was Pinot Noir. And I think a lot of winemakers, obviously, when you start out in the Willamette Valley, that's probably where you're going to start because there's so much planted here. But I think things have kind of changed since then. In 2014, we had a warmer vintage. I increased to about 500 cases of wine. And then during this time, I was starting to release my 2013s. And I think I made good wines. I think that helped me grow. But I think I was in the right place at the right time. And my wines got in front of some people in New York City who I think were influential on helping me start. Alice Firing and Pascaline Lepelletier. I remember those were probably the first 2 people in New York City to try my wines. And Chamber Street Wines was a big help. I was a big fan of that wine shop when I was tasting wine. I spent so much money buying wine from Chambers Street. They still are one of my favorite wine shops in the United States. And then did 2 Pinot Noirs, and then in 2014 I stuck with the Pinot Noir thing, but I dabbled in a little bit of Grenache from the Columbia Valley, and then 2015 I increased my production a little bit more, and from being in New York City I kind of caught the natural wine bug and started tasting all these wines I'd never tasted before, really, and different flavors, and all completely raw wines, no filtration, nothing added, no sulfur or anything. And so I did get on the zero sulfur bandwagon briefly. And in 2015, I made about 1,000 cases of wine, and nothing had any sulfur added to it. And there's some of the quirkiest, most intriguing wines I think that I've ever made, and then a few of the worst wines that I've ever made as well. And 2015 was a very warm year as well, so it was difficult to make. It's difficult to make zero sulfur wines, I think, in warmer climates or warmer vintages, just because of pH. Let's see, and then 2015, I was kind of rocking and rolling, and things were getting moving with my brand, and started getting into new markets. I got into California, and then 2016 is kind of when I started doing more non-Willamette Valley wines. So I moved into the Columbia Gorge and the Columbia Valley, and I was seeing out in the market that the Pinot Noir market was becoming very saturated. And I didn't want to compete with some of the people here who had been established and had the whole single vineyard thing going, and kind of the traditional style of Oregon Pinot Noir is not something that I was wanting to do. It wasn't something that really excited me, and also I just didn't want to compete against everyone who's already been doing it for so long. So I kind of decided to go away from all Willamette Valley and Pinot Noir and kind of see what else is out there. And so I went into the Columbia Valley, and I found some grapes that I had already worked with, Verdelho, Portuguese grape, Touriga Nacional, Graciano, and then I had some access to some bush vine, Mourvedre and Grenache, and all the Rhone varieties, Malbec, Cinsault, Cunoise, just a lot of fun stuff, that you don't see, and a lot of things that I could blend as well. So 2016 was definitely a changing year for me, in that I started kind of backing away from Willamette Valley Pinot Noir or Willamette Valley wines, and focusing more on Columbia Valley, the Columbia Valley, Columbia Gorge. And then since 2016, I've kind of stayed on that same path, about 50% Oregon, 50% Washington. Yeah. The last few years, I've been focusing a little bit more on skin contact white wines or orange wines, depending on. For me, I like to, if the grape is greenish yellow, I don't call it an orange wine. Yeah. But if the grape skins or have an orange hue to them, and the wine looks orange, then that's kind of my sense of orange wine. So working with Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, Riesling, Viognier, some of these kind of more aromatic white wines, and making fresher styles of skin contact white wines. So not oxidative, not overly phenolic, doing pet nats. So now I got a whole lineup of a lot of different wines that I'm making, all the way from very austere Chardonnays to big tannic Cabernet. The only thing I don't do is make sweet wines yet.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. If I could do a natural port styled wine, I'd love to do that, but got to figure that out.
Incredible to hear that all in one go, and I'm kind of, I guess, nearing the end of my time here in the Willamette Valley, and it's definitely one of the more kind of broad set of experiences, I guess, that you're bringing out there, and it's great to hear about all of these different experiences, Europe, Southern Hemisphere, all sort of coming together, and I guess shaping you in your own way. But I specifically really like the part of bringing it home, and going with the 2015 year. Continual learning, really, isn't it? It's what it feels like to me. It's just there's always opportunities to learn, and I think some of that is by you physically going out and kind of finding those learning experiences. But who knows? Over time, I guess those experiences have to kind of sit with you and take hold, and you'll maybe recognize the fruit in those valleys that you work with. You'll recognize them kind of with a different lens, given your experience. And it's like you can constantly now you're kind of back home, you can just keep learning, and applying all of those different experiences. And I just think it's just a great kind of advert for just getting out there into the world, but then kind of coming home and keep experimenting and keep seeing what else is out there. Super exciting to hear the different grape varieties, and super excited to kind of taste and have a look into really how all of those experiences, all of those different terroirs kind of come together in the glass.
So now the 2019 vintage is finished, and we're moving into 2020. This time of the year for me has been for the last 3 years, the time where I do a lot of disgorging and pet nat productions. Pet nat production. I have 2 this year. I haven't disgorged one of them. So this wine that we have in front of us is an orange pet nat that I'm about to release called City Pop. Okay. And City Pop is a genre of music that I'm fond of. It's basically late 70s, Korean, Japanese, kind of poppy, funk, jazz music that I stumbled upon, and kind of now I'm obsessed with it. And I needed a name for a wine, so decided. And fizzy and pop, it just kind of sounded like it fit. Yeah. But let's see. Here we are, 2020. I'm kind of over my growth phase. I'm not growing anymore. I don't plan on expanding my production. I'm happy with where I am. Yeah. I do all of what I do with myself and Maureen, my assistant, and we do all the production together. When I'm here, Maureen is more kind of the co-winemaker who's here when kind of day-to-day things when I'm out selling wine. And so our focus is kind of trying to hone in and just keep on making better wines every year, which I think I'm doing. And that feels good. If I get a lot of good constructive criticism from people, and a lot of it is positive. Yeah. Some of it's negative, but that's okay. And I feel like I'm improving every year, so that makes it fun for me. That makes it doesn't feel stale. And the fruit, my farmers are getting better and better. I think like I was saying before, in 2016, I kind of found my voice. Like a musician finds their voice, I think I've found my voice with my wines and what I want to do. And basically, I think in a nutshell, what that is like dangling off the edge of a cliff and trying to make wines as naked as I can, but have them still taste like quote unquote wine and not taste like kind of sludgy kombucha or I grew up in my wine career tasting the classics. And so that's kind of my reference point. The overly funky, natty wines that are out there right now are really interesting to me, but it's not kind of where I like to go with my own wines, with my own songs. And I think my history of making more points-driven Robert Parker, Wine Spectator kind of wines, which if you look at my my resume, it's kind of along that line, or along those lines. I think that background has helped me make cleaner wines now. And also one thing that I noticed too is that I don't know if it's a generational thing, but a lot of people who are getting into wine production just go in and want to be a winemaker right away, or go work one harvest for someone and kind of get it, dip their feet in the water and then say, I'm a winemaker. And more often than not, very much more often than not, it shows in their wines. Their wines taste like someone who just went and worked a harvest and decided to become a winemaker. Moving forward, I think on the next step for me is I'm looking at some land to plant some of the grapes that I'm really fond of. And in the Columbia Valley, it reminds me a lot of the Douro or Ribera Sacra, Galicia. Down here, it's kind of much more maybe like the Loire, or I don't know, it's more rolling hills down in the Willamette Valley. But up in the Columbia Gorge, the Columbia Gorge going into the Columbia Valley, basically the Columbia Valley, it's high desert. It's very orange and brown, and you don't see as much green. It's not as lush down or up there as it is down here. So looking to plant some grapes that are, I think, new to all of the United States. Arinto, Cercial, all the Touriga Franca, Touriga Nacional. What else? Encruzado, I'd really like to work with. Really, really big fan of Portuguese wines, Portuguese grapes. So, and then I also like Gamay and Aligoté. So, I don't know if I end up finding something here in the Willamette Valley, I'd like to go in that direction with more Loire-ish style. I think it seems like most of the people out in the Willamette Valley right now are kind of moving towards Chardonnay, and we're doing the whole Pinot Chardonnay thing, and that I've kind of enjoyed that. It's diversified things a little bit more, for people coming out to the Willamette Valley to taste wines. More often than not, when you go out and taste, you'll have a lineup of 6 or 7 different Pinot Noirs, and then you go to the next place and it's almost all Pinot Noir. And so I like the fact that Oregon is diversifying their grapes at the moment, and I know that opinion is not shared probably with a lot of people, but I think there's more opportunity here than just Pinot Noir, and we've already found that Pinot Noir works well here, and I'm excited to move on to some other areas with the Willamette Valley. Natural wines, low intervention, minimalist wines. I know there's a lot of movement and momentum in that, or I think there is. It feels like when I get more and more people asking for, or I hear them asking for orange wines, and when I'm in restaurants, the person next to me is asking the sommelier if they have any orange wines. And 5 years ago, we didn't see that. And now we have wine lists with orange wines on them, and then you're starting to get wine lists with a natural section, or a place that's touted as being only natural and that kind of thing. And it makes me wonder whether or not natural wines should be in the same category as conventional wines, or if they're their own separate thing because of how different they are. Or sometimes they don't taste as different, so there's just not really anything defining them. And I think that my wines kind of straddle they're closer to more classic wines than natural wines stylistically. I think you'll take when you taste them, but you can tell that the method is very minimal. But I'm curious to see how this momentum goes, because this year has been. There's been a lot of change in natural wines, and I think it's due to a lot of the hype and the popularity and the growth, and some of it's good and some of it's maybe not so good. But I'm looking forward to people who haven't tried these wines in the past, or maybe people who were a little bit skeptic about them, to maybe have more of an open mind and maybe not focus on that view of wine, natural wines, as being flawed, because not all of them are, and it really depends on what your version of a flaw is. And I think we are all flawed in some way, and I think we all have beautiful flaws, and I think that kind of resonates in wine as well.
I think you raise an interesting point, and it's, low intervention versus no intervention. There's always some element of involvement. No one, that I know of is making decent wines from sticking a load of grapes in a vat somewhere and buggering off for 3 months or 3 weeks and coming back and, oh, there we go, it's made. I guess you're always intervening, you're always making decisions, and at the end of the day, you've got practicalities as well. You've got customers, you've got distributors who you're working with, and you've got to kind of always be producing something that's saleable. In some levels, it's you're producing a commodity as well, and it's all of these different things. It's never as simple. And personally, I for one, I'm taken aback sometimes, actually, in certain circles and at certain tastings. I think the drinking public and the tasting public, I think they can be overly demanding. I think they can be insensitive, unempathetic, to just what goes into the product. Because when you stand at that table and you see the beautiful looking wine, and you make your judgment, or you pull your face, or you ask your questions. I think when you just think about Joe, just think about all of the experiences that he's had, and all of the things that come into producing that. It's not easy. And I just think, we fads and fashions come and go, but at the end of the day, you're still here, and all the other winemakers are still there as well. So I think, let's just, be sensitive to that, and be respectful for the craft and what's gone into getting the skill to make wines like this. So, yeah.
What's been going on in my head in regard to the natural wine or the wine scene in general, but one thing that I've been noticing, I don't want to go off topic about my wines. I'll go back to them, but is glorifying winemakers and seeing them as rock stars, or seeing them, as buying a brand because of the way that a person portrays themselves. And I'm guilty a little bit of that in social media, because I kind of use it to make fun of myself. But in reality, as a person, I'm definitely not the person that I portray when I'm on social media. But something I kind of have a hang up with is people selling their image and selling, and especially within the natural wine community, business, whatever, is really portraying it as being this party atmosphere where there's people where open drug use and drinking wine directly out of the bottle, and that kind of thing. And I think that for people that are trying to understand natural wines and take it seriously, people aren't taking that seriously, because it just looks like a bunch of people goofing off. And not that wine is supposed to be this, nose up, hoity-toity thing. It's a fermented beverage that I think, I know it's a fermented beverage, but I think that where I'm going with this is that it's something that brings people together. I enjoy it with my friends, having it with food, and it's just kind of part of living life. And the excess part of it, the over drinking, the drug use, and the using your image and your body to sell your product. And I know it's been done in the past, but it seems like it's more so in the natural wine area. That's very prevalent in that. And in the future, I think I hope that we get people that are making really good wines, and people are loving the wines for what's inside the bottle. The story is definitely interesting, but I think more often than not, you see people buying wines off of hype rather than what's in the bottle. And I have gone out and tried some of these wines from people that there's a lot of hype about. And, I've tasted like wines that taste like Epoisse cheese. I don't know if you've ever had Epoisse from
I don't think so.
I think it's Burgundia, but
can imagine.
it's a very stinky, cheesy baby diaper kind of smell, like that orange cheese. And I've had some wines that tasted like tomato soup, or just like, or kombucha, and like and I'm not saying that that's bad, but I mean, this to me, this and it's like chunky. There's pieces of gloop and mud in it, and to me, that's not wine, And they're charging a lot of money for it too. I mean, I don't make much money doing this. I barely scrape by, and for me to spend $100 on something like I was just describing that I'm just going to pee out an hour or two later, that doesn't make sense to me, And so I don't know. That's just kind of a thought I've been thinking about is just glorifying winemakers and kind of I really like I'd like to take a step back and just kind of focus more on the region and the producer, but more what they're doing in the bottle, and not who they are, their gender, the color of their skin, like all of that, is just who the producer is. But I just really want to focus on what's in the bottle, and if it inspires me or intrigues me and makes the hairs on my arm stand up, that's what wine is to me.
And
I'm super happy, as I think I've always said, and I'll reiterate again, that's the thing about this medium, is that it's an open forum. I'm delighted that you brought up these points, and they're out there, and people can respond to them. And I think people have brought up similar points in the past. I know of a very famous restaurateur in London who won't buy certain wines now because of what goes on the label. There's a sort of a sexism and a glorification angle of that's kind of bordering on obscene, in his words, and he's like, you don't need to go there. And I think at the end of the day, I would like to think that my view on kind of the scene in London, and maybe there's some differences here. Maybe there's just differences in myself and the experiences that I'm seeking out. Is that maybe the people who are really kind of doing well and maybe have the most longevity, I guess, as importers, because we don't produce so much in the UK. Are the ones that are kind of seeking out the types of wines that you've spoken to yourself wanting to make. The ones that I kind of call and say, that they wear their natural, inverted commas, whatever you want to call it, they wear their natural characteristics and lineage and heritage, quite lightly, because you can just enjoy them as wines. You don't need to know that they are quote unquote natural. They're just tasty wines. They're just well-made wines. Okay, fine. People will seek out for the principles and the approach of the owners. But should somebody, God forbid, order it by mistake, because they're not in that separate section, and it's in a classic restaurant or it's in wherever, they're just going to enjoy it, and what's wrong with that? These should be, I think. And wine in general, should be for everybody. And as I say, happy to share those thoughts and get them out there.
Chenin. So Pascaline Lepelletier, she now works at Racine's restaurant in New York. I think I got hooked on Chenin through just being around her in tastings, and talking with her, and She had warned me not to do Chenin, though, with skin contact, because tannins seem to be pretty grippy with Chenin. But I kind of took a chance, and I think it's because of the climate in the Columbia Valley is different than Loire, a little bit warmer. The skins probably get a little bit more maturity, and So I did a skin contact Chenin. It's about 2 weeks, and it's aged in 700-liter barrels. It's. I think if you didn't tell someone this was a natural wine, they wouldn't pin it as natural wine. Really happy with it. It's been tough explaining to people in the United States what Chenin Blanc is, because people are so varietally focused here. And so then you have to explain to them, well, it's not Chardonnay and it's not Sauvignon Blanc. It's its own thing. It has taste and smells of quince and ginger and flowers and to me, this wine kind of does a little bit. And Chenin Blanc has something that I love in all the wines that I drink and make, and it has acid. And so a wine's got to have acid, man. For me, at least, I want to come back and have a couple more sips. Yeah. And when it doesn't have acid and it's clunky, I can't drink it.
As you've just been talking there, you've got the Chenin on the front label here. It literally just does say Chenin. Tell us a little bit, perhaps, about the vintage here, because I'm finding those notes that you're talking to there it's absolutely gorgeous as well. Technical term. What was happening in the vintage?
2017 was a warmer vintage in both Oregon and Washington State. So because of the elevation with the vineyards that I work with, I don't own any vineyards. I only buy grapes. Like I said, going forward in the future, I'd love to plant a vineyard up in the Columbia Valley with Portuguese grapes. That's my dream. I am. I'm putting it out there. Or if it needs to be here in the Willamette Valley, some aligoté and some other fun stuff. 2017, warmer year. It was a year where we had forest fires. So there were a few vineyards that had just a little bit of smoke damage in the wines, not the actual vineyard. And those are very interesting. My Graciano and my Cinsault both have just a little note of some smoke, but not enough that I wanted to not bottle it. It was just very, very faint. And I don't pick it up in the Chenin, but it's from the same vineyard that had some of those notes, smoky notes. So vintage. The fun thing about the vineyards that I work with is that they are all colder or higher in elevation. And so this is about 700 meters. It gets down to, I don't know what it is in Celsius, but Fahrenheit around 40, almost down to freezing at night. Yeah. So down to 0 or 2 or 3 during the night. And then during the day, it gets up to, during harvest time, it gets up to 88, 89, 90, 91 with lots of sunlight. So photosynthesis happening all the time, especially in Washington State. And so you're not getting those green notes, for example, in Cabernet that you would get down even in Napa. There's so much sun there that it burns out those eucalypt or capsicum kind of tastes. So Chenin, same deal, high elevation, about 700 meters, lots of acidity, ripe by my standards. I usually pick both of my whites and my reds somewhere between 11.5 and the high 12s potential alcohol. And that's where I find most years I have good. I'm happy with the maturity of the grapes. The flavors are where I want them. The acids are probably higher than most people's standards, but the fact that, especially my whites, that I'm doing a full malolactic fermentation in all of my white wines, I need that acidity as well. Otherwise, a bunch of it wouldn't be easy to make them into yummy wines if I didn't. So high elevation and cold climate is kind of my secret to making fresh, racy, acidic wines in warmer vintages. And then on the flip side, when we have a colder vintage, that's where I have to be, I think, a little bit more of a winemaker, and do a lot of more decision making. And so, for example, this last year, 2019, we had a very cold October, and with grape varieties like Mourvedre and Grenache, that are my last picks of the year usually. Let's see what else. Sangiovese and Nebbiolo. all of those are about 9.5% alcohol, very light and fresh. And that's one of the fun things about being a winemaker in a cold climate is sometimes you have really cold years where you make wines like that, like I was just describing, a 9.5% Mourvedre, and I think that just with my experience, I can still make something, and I did make wines that were maybe not anything like your typical Grenache, but still enjoyable and fresh, and those wines are almost rosé-like, and I did a very gentle extraction on them, and they're really high-toned and almost like a bigger rosé. But I don't think a lot of winemakers who are making those great varieties would feel comfortable putting that in bottle, because it's not this bigger 13 and 14% jammy thing. So that's probably my favorite thing. That's the reason I moved back here to Oregon. It was the variation of vintage, and the fact that one year we could get a very hot year where, it reminds me of working in Sonoma County, making really ripe Pinot Noir and what to do. And going back to my vineyard sources, the high elevation, colder climate vineyard saves me in those warm years, so I'm not making 15% Pinot. I'm still making 13.5% Pinot. And then, but in the colder years, sometimes you have to make rosé or make a really acidic wine. And
yeah, you've already kind of given us a clue to the origins of the city pop. So take us now inside the glass.
All right. So Pétillant Naturel, bottle fermented sparkling wine. I really like clean expressions of Pet Nat. I don't like cheesy funky flavors in sparkling wines. I like champagne a lot. I like good champagne. I like really dry champagne. So most of my Pet Nats are bone dry. With this particular bottling, City Pop, this is an American Pet Nat. The AVA is designated as American because the grapes come from both Oregon and Washington. Mm-hmm. And so what I did, I changed my wines every year. Every year I'm making different wines or bringing back, the same wines. You never really know what you're going to get. I don't know what I'm going to make every year. But in 2019, I had Viognier that came in with lots of acid and really nice floral character to it that I decided that would be a good base for a sparkling wine. And so I got that Viognier in and pressed it off. And then the next day, we had a bunch of Alsatian varieties coming in from Oregon. We had Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, well, that's Alsatian, but Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Auxerrois, Riesling, and Gewürztraminer. And I got those and put them into fermenters, fermented them separately. On the back label here, I said, pairs nicely with your favorite banchan, which is Korean tapas, basically. I love Korean food. But let's see, with this Pet Nat. So I started with Viognier, and then I got Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Auxerrois, Riesling, and Gewürztraminer. Fermented them all separately on their skins for a couple of weeks, and picked up that kind of orangish hue. And then pressed all of that into the tank, stainless steel tank with Viognier, and let it all ferment together in a big blend. And then it fermented down until there was just a little bit of sugar. And then I went to bottle with it, and it finished ferment in bottle. And I just hand disgorged it, and now it's ready to go. So 3 months later from harvest, I already have a wine ready to release. And it's kind of just going along with that whole thing. It's fun. It's meant to be fun, It's not meant to be... and this is definitely a wine. I think wine should be with food, but this is more of an aperitif or like, just getting the night started kind of thing. I think it would pair well with a lot of foods as well, but this is kind of my pre-game kind of drink. And I like the aromatics from the Gewürztraminer. I like aromatic Pet Nats, so.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I've got to say, and maybe this is me kind of riffing to your point earlier, where winemaking's difficult. Consistent, good, clean winemaking is difficult, and I will say, for me, again, my personal experience, what I've tried. The Pet Nat is the one I always kind of approach with caution, because it really, to me, it has been the most variable kind of wine that I've ever had, I would say. Because sometimes, and I've said it on here before, some of the Pet Nats I come across are just watery. They're a bit weedy. They're not. There's no presence here, and it's my, big smile on my face. It's nice for me to reference those wines, and then to come here and try something that's the complete opposite. That is a complete wine. It's a complete opposite of those wines, and in and of itself, it is complete. It's got depth. It's got persistence. It's a real wine, and it's I think just maybe it will resonate with somebody out there. But if you've tried Pet Nats in the past, and you think it's a fad, and you think it's a fashion thing, seriously, seek out the City Pop. Seek out one of Joe's Pet Nats and give that a try. Because again, it's all of those things you've said about your philosophy in the bottle, which is for the people out there, the most important place is where they can find it, where they can meet all of those ideals that you have in the glass, and drink it and have fun with it.
Bring It is my red blend. It's kind of my flagship wine. Blending is something that I learned again, or that Dirk Nieport influenced me a lot on. And talking about blends with him, and I think more specific to port production, because it's such a blend-focused thing. But Dirk is an amazing taster, and he has an amazing palate. And one thing that really stuck with me when I was talking with him about wines is the fact that a blend is always going to be a better wine. A blend will always be better than one. Single variety wines from one place are going to be different, but you can always make a wine better if you're blending, because you have all of these components to work with. And if you look out at these vines here, every single of these vines, all of these vines are all different. So wine is a blend of something anyway. Even if you're making 2 barrels of Pinot Noir, one barrel is going to taste different than the other barrel, and so on and so on. So this is my blend. I have a lot of fun doing this. I get to go around and see how the vintage performs. I get to taste and what I'm focusing on with the Bring It is my red barrels that have the most acid and freshness. And so with those barrels, more often than not, they are the free run, which is the first juice to come out of your fermenter when you're about to press. And I separate my barrels according to free run and press. And so my free run barrels, more often than not, are lower in pH, higher in acid, a little bit more translucent, and just kind of, more Pinot Noir-esque. And then if you look at my press wines, they're a little more tannic, a little more gritty. pHs are a little bit higher. They're definitely a good blending component. Not that press barrels are lower in quality. They're just different. But with the Bring It blend, I'm aiming for a free run, and so I want freshness. And so this is 10 different grape varieties. It's an American AVA wine. It's Oregon and Washington. The Oregon component is Pinot Noir, and blending Pinot Noir is kind of sacrilege in Oregon, but I don't mind. Pinot Noir has great aromatics, earthy aromatics, and lots of freshness. And so I'm starting with the base of Pinot Noir. It's about 30% usually. This is my second year making this. 30% Pinot Noir. And then on top of that, I go and look at what else in my cellar that's red. look at it and just kind of see what I have to work with, quantities. And in this year, I had a lot of Syrah. So I decided to pick out some really fresh Syrah barrels. With my red wines, I don't destem anything. So all of these wines that you'll taste of mine that are red are 100% whole cluster. And another influence of the Douro and Dirk, using stems with wines, not being afraid to have quote-unquote green flavors in my wines. So 100% whole cluster, and it's not a field blend. This is a cellar blend. So I'm going through and tasting and putting together different percentages of wine of different grape varieties and finding what works for me in that year. So this blend will change every year, but this year is 10 different grape varieties. It's Pinot Noir and Syrah, 30% each, and then it's 5% or so each Graciano, Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Mourvèdre, Malbec. Yeah, I could go on and on. But the fun thing about this is that there's a couple of white grape varieties as well. There's Pinot Gris, Skin Contact, and there's some Marsanne orange wine mixed in there for aromatics. So it's my blending kind of project of the year. And also when I'm able to do a blend like this, I'm able to get a higher quantity of wine out. Something I didn't really touch on earlier as well is that I only work with vineyards that are practicing or certified organic. I mean, it's mostly herbicide use that I'm not wanting, but it's difficult to find certified organic vineyards. In actually more so up in the Columbia Valley than it is down here, which is strange because there's so much more disease pressure down here than the warmer climate.
These are absolutely, I would say, over my journey, in this sort of in the wine world, continuing journey. These are absolutely my favorite types of wines because they speak to really, don't need to repeat it. They speak to all of your philosophy, I think, and everything that you said there about good wines, interesting winemaking, different grape varieties, bringing your experience, lots of references to Dirk Nijport and to, the port blenders and bringing that element of the story out. But then also, putting it on the shelf, you're telling me it's sitting retail in the US around $22, which, my reaction and, we sort of clarified, that's an accessible price point. And it's a wine that's going to be, I think, better for people than, things that are maybe made, with less soul and with less integrity, I would say. So, you're giving people a gateway. I think it's always important to give people a gateway and not just, floss with the $100 wines that are kind of just out of reach for so many people in today's day and age. And as I say, for that reason, because it's true to place, because it's true to you, and because actually people can afford to buy it, and it looks amazing as well, and it tastes amazing. These are absolutely, I think, some of the most important types of wines that are out there anywhere. Closing out the four wines, we've got, of course, it had to be closing on a Pinot Noir. So take us again inside this last Pinot Noir of the flight, and I can't wait to hear what you've got to say about it.
Okay. So 2015, that was the year, one of the warmest years we've had recently. And it was the monumental year where I decided to not use any sulfur on any of my wines. And like I said before, I made some brilliant, amazing wines, and I made some pretty not so amazing ones as well. But it was influential on me because I found my voice, and I found that going in that direction wasn't something that really was me. Wasn't me in the style of wines I wanted to make. They were interesting, but I needed to take a step back and think about things and find whatever worked with me. And all it took for me with my method is just a little sprinkle of sulfur right before I go to bottle. And I found that that helped keep away anything that wanted to happen in bottle. Specifically, the fault that you'll find in some natural wines or wines with zero sulfur. I don't know how many people are aware of yet in wine, but in natural wines, it's talked about quite often. It's called mouse, and mousiness is something that you'll find in wines that have had no sulfur added to them or not enough. But you barely, in my opinion, from my past experiences, the amount of sulfur that you need to add to prevent mouse from happening is literally almost nothing. It's 5 or 10 parts per million. So going back to the 2015 vintage, this is a wine that I called Hibernation. And it is 100% Pommard clone Pinot Noir, which is what all these vines in front of us here are, or Pommard. And they're called Pommard because the cuttings that were sent over came from the town of Pommard. Whether or not the actual vines came from the village of Pommard, I don't know, but it's a clone of Pinot Noir that I prefer in Oregon. The other clones that are more in use here would be the Dijon clones, and those are kind of more recent clones that people brought in the mid-90s to so that we'd have earlier ripening Pinot Noir. We'd have it ripen before all the rains. And then now here, 20 years later, we're not having those rains that we had. And those Dijon clone Pinot Noirs are very ripe. And now the Pommard is just kind of right in its perfect place. So anyway, I prefer using Pommard. This is 100% Pommard. It's from Consilla Vineyard. Consilla Vineyard is up on the northwest tip of the Willamette Valley AVA. North of the Yamhill Carlton. It's north of Yamhill Carlton, sorry. This is 100% whole cluster, and it's a 6-month maceration. So what I did is I took a concrete egg and I filled it up with whole cluster Pinot Noir, and yeah, it's grippy. Yeah. I sealed the top of it and walked away for 6 months. I vented it a few times during fermentation just so I didn't get a tank that exploded, a concrete egg, because those eggs are very precious. Yeah, I didn't want my egg to crack. But I mean, not to keep on repeating Dirk Newport, but this was an experiment that he had when I worked with him in the Douro that he had me do. He wanted to see what would happen if we just took a tank of grapes, of port grapes, Touriga, and all those different varieties, filled up a tank full of whole cluster grapes and just let them sit and see if they would ferment just by the weight of the grapes. But this is an open top tank where there's oxygen. And so basically it just turned into a big kind of volatile acidity aldehydic mess, I think. Not to be negative, sorry, Dirk. But one thing that he probably could have done to make what he was thinking about happen would be to use a closed top fermenter. And then you're not losing that carbon dioxide. And it's kind of like a carbonic maceration, but not carbonic maceration where you're taking dry ice and filling a tank full of carbon dioxide, which is how a lot of people make their carbonic wines here in the Willamette Valley. And I see that as a huge manipulation to a wine. Also, the end result with the wines taste like bubblegum and bananas and stuff that really doesn't taste like wine. But so it's a 6-month maceration inside of a concrete egg. And then after 6 months in late spring, or late March at least, in spring, so the hibernation thing, and basically just letting grapes sit inside of a concrete egg for 6 months and then digging them out and pressing them off. And then they age for another 6 months. The wine ages for another 6 months inside of the egg. So it's 12 months inside of the egg, 6 months as grapes, 6 months as wine. Zero sulfur, no filtration, it's just organic grapes. And it's not your typical Pinot Noir.
You're right, you did say this wouldn't be like any other Pinot that I've had, and yeah, that grip, that 6 months on the skins, and the sort of really I guess different type of maturation and fermentation environment that you've created for these grapes is bringing all of that out there. And and I'm sure, as you say, it's great to again hear about 2015, hear about it feels like you're in a different place now to that which you were in 2015, but it feels like from me sitting here alongside you, it's like you're still proud of this wine and proud of what happened in 15, and you may not do exactly what you did again back in 15, but you've got the evidence of 15. These wines are still with you, and they're still out there in the world, and I'm sure to a lot of people out there this particular wine that I'm trying is bringing people still a lot of pleasure. So nothing's ever sort of black and white, is it? There's always shades of grey, and it's again a totally unique, totally one of a kind Pinot Noir for me from Oregon. Lovely. Repetitious, I'm sure, if you've listened your way through the series, but another huge thank you to you, Joe. Totally blown away really by the hospitality I received on the trip, and your hospitality here to come to the winery on your day off and spend this time with me, and really appreciate it. And you really, in closing, I just invite you to you've been reflecting on the past and evolution and change and journeys and bringing these things together. So let's maybe just look out the window, look forward, and what is it that you hope, anticipate coming over the horizon?
I think that it's very apparent now that we are becoming globalized, and business is becoming more and more globalized, and you're going to see what I expect in the future. You're going to see wines from Oregon and in places that have never had Oregon wines before, or that maybe aren't really they know of Oregon, that we produce wine, but maybe they haven't had Oregon wines. And for example, one country that I'm really excited about that just got my wines imported is Poland. So I'm really, really excited to have my wines in wine bars in Warsaw and Krakow, and it's just a place that I never thought I would have my wines. Another place is Seoul, Korea. I'm obsessed with Korean food and Korean culture too, and I can't wait to go over there and see what the wine scene is like there. But I guess what I'm getting at is that wine is just becoming more and more globalized, and we have access to, now everyone has access to wines from everywhere, and new places. Wines from Brazil, or wines that I'm starting to become interested in. And I took a trip to Cuba. They're making wines in Cuba. Wines from Mexico. I was just in Mexico. Mexico City has a huge wine scene now, natural wine scene as well. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see more of that happening, and I'd really like. I hope that some of what is happening with our government right now doesn't interfere with that going on, because I think the exchange of culture and product, I think that's good for everyone. I think that brings people together, and I don't know if we can segue, Elena, or something that makes that go into at least the UK, but I think the wine drinking culture, from what I know, it goes much more into the past, more than the United States, obviously. And so what I've found during my experience in being over there, at least I've only been in London, but in the wine scene in London, is that people are much more educated on wine, and just the level of wine drinkers there is at a higher caliber than the United States. And I think what we have to offer here in Oregon is something that's much different than California. You know, it's its own unique place. Our wines taste like where they come from. I don't know if you've had a chance to go out and go taste some of the food that's from this area, but I think, you know, it's like, at least when I'm in France, when I'm in the Jura, I'm eating the food of the Jura, and when I'm in Burgundy, it's just our wines somehow just match up with all the food here. And here we're looking at mushrooms, truffles, salmon, you know, the seafood, and the Four Seasons here. So we have lots of amazing fresh vegetables and produce and that kind of thing. So Pinot Noir really goes with our culture here and what the wine does and what we do here, and other grapes too. But I guess where I was going with that is that it's much different than Napa, and I hope that that people realize that here it's I make about 5,000 cases, and I'd say that's about the average size of most wineries here, maybe even less. And these aren't big brands, you know, and it's not Disneyland like Napa can seem like. And I don't think it'll ever be that way. I think that when you come to Oregon, you know, the Willamette Valley will probably grow and grow, and you'll have more producers, but everyone's going to be probably doing about the same production as what I'm doing, and it's more artisanal. You know, it's just a family or a couple people making the wine, and it's not a brand with a brand ambassador and, you know, a marketing team and that kind of thing. And I'm really excited to bring more of these wines from the Pacific Northwest in outside of the United States, and in particular the United Kingdom. So.
Thank you so much, Joe. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And I absolutely feel like your wines are a great advert for diversity and experience in winemaking. Do see below for the Swick Wines website. And as Joe mentioned, you can find him on most of the social media platforms. Joe's wines are not currently in the UK, and he is actively seeking representation. Next time on the podcast, in episode 398, I'll head to a vineyard that many of the other guests have mentioned, Johan in the Van Duzer corridor. Today's episode marking the 18th of 20 episodes in the series. Now is a great time to look back and see if there's any that you might have missed. Just head to interpretingwine.com/WVWA to see a list of all the episodes released to date. And of course, if you're not already, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.